The walk back through Ridgemont felt longer than the desperate journey there. Lena kept her head down, shoulders hunched against the January wind that knifed between the wooden storefronts. Her hands throbbed inside the stained bandages. She'd rewrapped them this morning with the last clean cloth she owned, but the fabric was already showing dark spots where the lesions seeped through. "That's her," someone muttered as she passed the general store. Lena didn't look up, didn't need to. She knew the voice. Mrs. Halloway, who used to invite her to church socials before the rash started spreading, before people began whispering that it might be catching, might be punishment, might be a sign of something unclean in Lena's blood or soul or past. The frontier had no patience for mysteries, especially ones that looked contagious. Her boots crunched through frozen mud as she turned down the alley behind the boarding house where she rented a single room. The owner had already given notice, 2 weeks to find somewhere else. As if there were anywhere else in a town of 300 souls where nobody wanted diseased goods under their roof. Lena's room was on the second floor, accessible by an exterior staircase that groaned under her weight. Inside, the space was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing everything she owned. The window overlooked the stable yard where she could hear horses stamping and men's voices carrying in the cold air. She unwrapped her hands at the wash basin, biting her lip as the fabric pulled away from raw flesh. The condition had started 6 months ago as a patch of dry skin on her left palm. She'd thought nothing of it. Working as a seamstress meant rough hands came with the territory. But it spread. Up her wrists, across her knuckles, and recently to her forearms. The skin cracked and wept, burning with an itch that sometimes woke her in the night, clawing at herself. Doctor. Harrison had been her last hope, the only doctor within 2 days' ride who had formal training back east, and he'd looked at her like she was carrying plague. Lena stared at her reflection in the clouded mirror above the washstand, 26 years old, though she felt ancient. Brown hair pulled back in a braid that hadn't seen a proper washing in weeks. She couldn't manage the fine motor work with her hands like this. Gray eyes that used to spark with ambition when she'd first come to Ridgemont, thinking she could build a dressmaking business, maybe even open a shop. That dream was as dead as the skin sloughing off her arms. She sat on the edge of the bed, letting the hopelessness wash over her in waves. The boarding house owner wanted her gone in 2 weeks. Her hands were too damaged to sew, which meant no income. Dr. Harrison wouldn't help. The next nearest doctor was in Cooperton, 3 days by wagon, and she'd heard he charged double Harrison's rates just for consultation. The mathematics of her situation were brutally simple. She was going to die here, either from whatever was eating her alive from the outside in, or from starvation when she couldn't pay for food, or from cold when winter deepened and she had no roof. Unless... The thought crept in like a draft under the door. There were stories. Whispers, really, about a man who lived up in the high country, miles beyond where decent folk ventured. A healer who'd turned his back on civilization, or been driven from it. The rumors varied. Some said he was a charlatan who'd fled east after killing patients. Others claimed he was a genius whose methods were too radical for traditional medicine. What everyone agreed on, Elias Varn helped people other doctors wouldn't touch. Lena had heard the name in hushed conversations, usually followed by someone changing the subject. The kind of thing respectable women weren't supposed to know about. But in a boarding house with thin walls, you heard things. She'd overheard 2 ranch hands talking once about a friend who'd gone up the mountain with a bullet wound that was going septic, came back 3 weeks later, whole and healthy. Of course, she'd also heard he was dangerous, that he performed experiments, that women who went up there alone sometimes didn't come back. But what did she have to lose? Lena stood and pulled her trunk from beneath the bed. She owned 1 decent dress, 2 work dresses, a winter coat that had belonged to her mother, a pair of men's boots she'd bought secondhand for walking, and a small leather purse containing $43, her entire savings after 2 years in Ridgemont. She dressed in layers, both work dresses, one over the other, then the good dress on top, then the coat. She wrapped her hands in the cleanest bandages she could manage, pulled on the boots, and pocketed the money. Everything else would stay. The boarding house owner could sell it for the rent she owed. It was 3 in the afternoon when Lena descended the exterior stairs for the last time. The stableman gave her a curious look as she passed, but said nothing. People in Ridgemont had stopped talking to her weeks ago. She followed Main Street to the north edge of town, where the road dissolved into a trail that climbed toward the mountains. The peaks were already touched with early snow, sharp and white against a sky going gray with the promise of more. No one stopped her. No one called out to ask where she was going or if she needed help. The frontier was like that. You could vanish and barely leave a ripple. The trail was worse than Lena expected. In summer it probably served hunters and trappers well enough, but January had turned it into a treacherous ribbon of ice and exposed stone. She slipped twice in the first hour, catching herself on rocks that bit through her bandages and made her hands scream. The second time she went down hard on one knee, tearing her dress and scraping skin she couldn't afford to lose. She forced herself up and kept climbing. The forest closed in as she gained elevation, lodgepole pine and spruce so thick they blocked the failing light. Lena had brought no supplies. No food, no bedroll, no matches. The decision to climb had been pure desperation, no room for planning. She'd simply started walking and told herself she wouldn't stop until she found Elias Varn or died trying. The latter was looking increasingly likely. By the time darkness fell, Lena had been climbing for 4 hours. Her legs shook with exhaustion, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her hands had started bleeding again inside the bandages. She could feel wetness spreading, warm at first, then cold as the wind found it. She stopped to rest against a boulder, sliding down to sit on the frozen ground. The temperature was dropping fast. She could see her breath fogging in front of her face, could feel the cold seeping through her layers of dresses and into her bones. This was stupid, a voice whispered in her mind. You're going to freeze to death on this mountain, chasing a rumor. But going back meant dying slowly in Ridgemont, alone in that tiny room with her hands rotting and her money running out. At least here she was doing something. At least here she was fighting. Lena pushed herself upright and kept walking. The trail grew steeper, forcing her to use her hands to pull herself over rocky sections. Each grip sent pain shooting up her arms, but she'd learned to breathe through pain over the past months. It was an old companion now, almost comforting in its familiarity. Somewhere above, an owl called. The sound was eerie in the darkness, making Lena's skin prickle. She'd never been this far from civilization before. Even the roughest parts of Ridgemont had lantern light, voices, the smell of cook fires. Here there was only wilderness and cold and the growing certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she saw it, a flicker of light between the trees. Lena stopped, heart hammering. It was too steady for a campfire, too warm for moonlight. It came from somewhere ahead and to the left, off the main trail. She left the path and pushed through undergrowth, branches catching at her coat and hair. The light grew stronger. Through the trees she could make out a structure, a cabin, larger than she'd expected, built against the shoulder of the mountain. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Windows glowed with lamplight. Someone lived here, someone who kept a fire burning and lamps lit after dark. Lena approached slowly, aware that she was a stranger arriving unannounced in the night. In the frontier, that was a good way to get shot. She stopped 20 feet from the front door, gathering her courage. Hello? Her voice came out thin, cracked from cold and disuse. Is anyone there? The door opened immediately, as if someone had been expecting her. A man stood silhouetted against the lamplight. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back from his face. He held a rifle in one hand, pointed at the ground, but ready. Lost? His voice was deep, careful. No. Lena took a shaky breath. I'm looking for Elias Varn. A pause. The man shifted his weight, and Lena realized he was studying her with the kind of attention that missed nothing. Her torn dress, her blood-stained bandages, the way she swayed on her feet. You found him, he said. Question is what you want. Help! The word came out smaller than she intended. The doctor in town won't see me. I heard you might. Elias Varn lowered the rifle completely and stepped aside. Get in before you freeze. Lena's legs almost gave out as she crossed the threshold. The interior was warm, blessedly, painfully warm after hours in the cold. She stood dripping melted snow onto wooden floorboards, taking in her surroundings with dazed eyes. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above. The main space was divided into distinct areas, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a sitting area with handmade furniture, and what looked like a medical workspace complete with examination table, shelves of bottles and instruments, and several oil lamps that filled the room with steady light. It was cleaner than she'd expected, more organized. The rumors had painted Elias Varn as some kind of wild hermit, but this space spoke of discipline and order. Sit. Elias gestured to the examination table. Lena hesitated, suddenly aware of how she must look. Filthy, half-frozen, desperate. I can pay. Didn't ask if you could. He was already moving to the shelves, pulling down bottles and setting them on a side table. Sit. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the table. Up close, she could see him better. Maybe 40, with a weathered face that had spent years outdoors, dark eyes that held intelligence but gave nothing away. His clothes were simple: wool shirt, canvas pants, boots built for work. He washed his hands at a basin with water from a kettle, methodical and thorough. Then he turned to face her, and Lena felt pinned by the weight of his attention. Show me, he said. She unwrapped her hands with shaking fingers. The bandages had stuck to the worst spots, and pulling them free reopened wounds that had started to scab. By the time both hands were bare, blood was running freely. Elias moved closer, holding one of the lamps. He took her left hand in his. His touch was warm, careful, completely impersonal, and turned it to catch the light. Lena watched his face, trying to read his reaction. Would he recoil like Dr. Harrison? Refuse to treat her? But his expression remained neutral, focused. He examined her palms, her knuckles, the undersides of her wrists. He didn't speak, didn't make sounds of disgust or concern, just looked. After a long moment, he released her hand and met her eyes. How long? 6 months. Started as just a patch on my palm. Pain? Yes. Burning and itching, worse at night. Fever? Nausea? No. He nodded slowly, then did something that made Lena's stomach clench. I need to see the rest. What? I need to see if this has spread beyond your hands and arms. That means you need to remove your dresses. Heat flooded Lena's face. This was what Dr. Harrison had refused to do. Examine her properly. He'd taken one look at her bandaged hands and sent her away without even asking questions. But this felt different, wrong, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with her condition and everything to do with being alone on a mountain with a strange man. She started to stand. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe it was. Elias stepped back, giving her space. But you climbed for hours in the dark to get here, which means you're desperate. And I'm telling you, I can't diagnose what I can't see. How do I know you're not? She couldn't finish the sentence. You don't. His voice was matter of fact. You don't know anything about me except rumors. Could be I'm exactly what people say. Dangerous, corrupt, worse. Could be you came up here and made a terrible choice. Lena stared at him, trying to find deception in his face and finding only tired honesty. But here's what I know, Elias continued. You've got a progressive skin condition that's spreading. Left untreated, it'll keep spreading until you're covered, and then infection will set in. You'll die badly, probably within a year. Harrison won't help you because he's a coward who only treats people who can pay well and won't damage his reputation. So you came here because you're out of options. Every word landed like a blow because it was true. I can help you, he said, but only if you trust me enough to let me do my job. Lena's hands throbbed. Her legs ached from the climb. She was so tired she could barely think straight. What choice did she have? Turn around, she said quietly. Elias turned to face the wall without argument. Lena stood on shaking legs and began unbuttoning her coat, then the outer dress, then the middle one. She stopped at the innermost layer, a simple work dress that buttoned up the front. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. The damaged skin made fine motor work nearly impossible, and she bit back a sound of frustration as she struggled. Need help? Elias asked, still facing the wall. No? The word came out harsh. She managed 3 more buttons, then gave up. Yes. He turned around, crossed to her with that same careful, deliberate movement. His hands were steady as he worked the remaining buttons, his eyes fixed on the task, nothing else. The dress fell open. Lena stood in her undergarments, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to shake. Elias lifted one of the lamps and held it close. Drop your arms. She did, though it took every ounce of willpower. He examined her forearms first, noting how the rash had climbed past her elbows. Then he checked her shoulders, her collarbone, the tops of her feet. His touch was clinical, impersonal, but Lena still felt her face burning with shame. "It's on your back," he said. "I need to see." She turned, felt him lift the fabric of her chemise. "Christ," he muttered, the first hint of emotion she'd heard from him. "Is it bad? It's spreading faster than I thought." He lowered the chemise. "You can get dressed." Lena pulled the work dress closed with shaking hands, not bothering with buttons. She felt cold again despite the warm room, cold from the inside out. "What is it?" she asked. "Am I dying?" Elias set the lamp down and moved to his shelf of bottles. He selected several, along with clean bandages and a mortar and pestle. "You're not dying," he said. "You've got severe psoriasis complicated by secondary infection from scratching and poor wound care. It's treatable." The relief hit so hard Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself on the examination table, breathing hard. "Treatable," she repeated. "With time and proper care, yes." He was grinding something in the mortar, dried herbs mixed with what looked like rendered fat. "It won't be fast. Weeks, maybe months before you see real improvement, and you'll need to stay here." Lena's head snapped up. "What? You can't do this alone. The treatment requires multiple applications daily, wound cleaning, monitoring for infection. You're in no shape to climb back down this mountain, and even if you could, you've got nowhere to go." He didn't look at her, focused on his work. "So you'll stay here until you're healed enough to leave." "I can't." She stopped. Couldn't what? Impose? She'd already imposed by showing up. Couldn't trust him? She'd already let him examine her half naked. Couldn't accept charity. She had $43 and no pride left. "There's a room off the back," Elias continued, still not looking at her. "It's small but private. You'll help with cooking and cleaning to earn your keep, whatever your hands can manage. Treatment starts tonight." He approached with the mortar, now filled with a pale green paste that smelled of camphor and something sharper, almost minty. "This will hurt," he warned, "but it'll help." Lena held out her hands. The paste burned like liquid fire when he applied it. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes, but forced herself to stay still. Elias worked quickly, covering every lesion, every crack, every weeping wound. Then he wrapped her hands in clean bandages, his movements expert and efficient. "There's a room in back," he said when he'd finished. "Door on the left. Bed's made up. Get some sleep." Lena slid off the examination table, swaying. "Thank you." Elias was already cleaning his instruments, his back to her. "Thank me when you're healed." The room was exactly as he'd described. Small, barely larger than her boarding house space, but clean. A narrow bed with quilts piled high, a small table, a chair. A window that would face east, though now it showed only darkness. Lena collapsed onto the bed fully dressed, too exhausted to do anything else. Her hands throbbed with a different kind of pain now, hot and intense, but somehow cleaner than before. The paste was working. She could feel it drawing out infection, fighting back against the rot. She should be terrified. She was alone on a mountain with a strange man who'd just ordered her to strip and now expected her to stay indefinitely. But instead, for the first time in months, Lena felt something that might have been hope. She woke to daylight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, Lena couldn't place where she was. Then memory returned. The climb, the cabin, Elias Varn's careful hands treating her wounds. She sat up slowly, assessing the damage. Her body ached everywhere, bruised and strained from yesterday's climb. Her hands still hurt, but the burning had diminished to a deep, steady throb. She made her way to the main room on unsteady legs. Elias sat at a rough-hewn table near the stove, eating what looked like cornmeal mush from a wooden bowl. He glanced up when she appeared but didn't speak. "Morning," Lena ventured. "Afternoon. You slept 14 hours. He gestured to the stove. "There's food if you want it." She served herself with bandaged hands that made the simple task clumsy and frustrating. The mush was plain but hot, and she was hungry enough that it tasted like a feast. They ate in silence. Lena snuck glances at her host, trying to understand him. He moved with the economy of someone who lived alone and had no need for unnecessary gestures. Everything he did had purpose. Your hands need fresh treatment, he said when she'd finished eating. Then I'll show you around. The treatment was as painful as the night before, but Lena was ready for it this time. She watched as Elias unwrapped the bandages, noting how he checked each wound, how his fingers probed gently for signs of infection, how he mixed a fresh batch of paste with slightly different proportions than yesterday. Why did you become a healer? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Elias paused in his work. Why does anyone choose their profession? That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. He resumed applying the paste. I studied medicine in Philadelphia, graduated top of my class, set up a practice in Boston, did everything right. Lena waited, sensing there was more. Then I started asking questions, Elias continued, about why certain treatments worked and others didn't, about whether the accepted methods were actually the best methods or just the most traditional. My colleagues didn't appreciate the inquiry. They forced you out? They tried to have me arrested for malpractice after I used an unconventional treatment that saved a patient's life. The medical board disagreed with my methods. His smile was bitter. So I left before they could destroy me completely. And came here. He finished wrapping her hands. Where I can practice medicine the way it should be practiced, based on what works, not what's acceptable. Lena studied his face, seeing the edges of old anger there, old betrayal. She understood that feeling. The frontier attracted two kinds of people, those seeking opportunity and those fleeing judgment. Elias Varn had clearly been the latter. What about you? He asked. How does the seamstress end up with $43 and nowhere to go? She flinched. You went through my pockets? Had to. You could have been carrying a weapon. He met her eyes without apology. Well? Lena looked down at her bandaged hands. I came to Ridgemont 2 years ago thinking I could build a business. I was good at sewing, really good. Had regular customers, was saving money to rent a shop. She swallowed. Then this started. People stopped coming, said they were afraid to catch it, or that it wasn't proper to be dressed by someone who looked diseased. I lost everything in 6 months. You didn't have family? Parents died when I was 19, no siblings. The old grief was distant now, worn smooth by time. I've been alone for a while. Not anymore. Elias stood, gathering his supplies. Come on, I'll show you how things work here. The tour revealed a setup more complex than Lena had realized. Behind the cabin was a root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables, dried meat, and grains. A small barn housed 2 goats and a cow. There was a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop. I'm mostly self-sufficient, Elias explained. Hunt for meat, trade with trappers for what I can't make or grow. Patients sometimes pay in goods instead of money. How many patients do you have? Depends on the season. Winter is slow, hard for people to make the climb. Summer, I might see 2 or 3 a week. Lena watched him check the goats with practiced ease. Do they all stay? Some do, the ones who need extended treatment or who have nowhere else to go. He glanced at her. You're not the first. Something in his tone made her ask, what happened to them? They healed, they left, they got on with their lives. He straightened. That's the goal here. Fix what's broken and send people back stronger. But Lena heard what he didn't say. Not everyone made it. Not everyone left. Over the next few days, she learned the rhythms of Elias's mountain. He rose before dawn to tend the animals and check trap lines. Breakfast was simple, eaten in silence. Then he'd treat her hands and back, the pace burning less as her skin began to respond to treatment, before moving on to whatever projects demanded attention. Lena helped where she could. Her bandaged hands made most tasks difficult, but she could feed chickens, gather eggs, stir pots on the stove. Elias accepted her fumbling efforts without comment, neither praising nor criticizing. He wasn't an easy man to be around. He spoke little, worked constantly, and had no patience for small talk, but he also wasn't cruel. When she struggled with a task, he'd quietly adjust it to something more manageable. When the treatment hurt badly enough to make her cry, he'd wait until she was ready to continue. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, Lena began to heal. The burning lessened, the cracks started closing. New skin grew and pink and tender, but whole. The worst lesions on her back began to shrink. 3 weeks into her stay, Elias unwrapped her hands after the morning treatment and studied them with what might have been satisfaction. "You're responding well," he said. "Better than I expected." Lena flexed her fingers, marveling at the decreased pain. "When can I stop the treatments?" "Months yet. This isn't a quick fix." He met her eyes. "But you're past the crisis point. If you keep improving like this, you'll make a full recovery." The words hit her with unexpected force. Full recovery. Not just survival, but actual healing. She'd been prepared to accept survival, to live with scars and pain as the price of staying alive. But Elias was offering more than that. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "Don't." His voice was flat. "I'm just doing my job." But it was more than a job. Lena saw that in the care he took with her treatment, the way he adjusted the paste formula based on how her skin responded, the patience he showed when she struggled with simple tasks. He cared about his patients, even if he pretended not to. That night, after Elias had retreated to his loft and the cabin fell quiet, Lena sat by the window in her small room and looked out at the mountain darkness. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity she'd never seen in town, undimmed by lantern light or smoke. She thought about Ridgemont, the boarding house, the people who'd turned their backs, Dr. Harrison's disgust. That life felt distant now, like it had belonged to someone else. Up here, she was just Lena. Not diseased, not shameful, not a problem to be avoided, just a woman learning to heal. For the first time since the rash had started spreading, she let herself imagine a future beyond mere survival. Maybe when she was healed, she wouldn't go back to Ridgemont. Maybe she'd find somewhere new, somewhere that didn't know her as the seamstress who'd gotten sick. Maybe she'd even stay here, if Elias would let her. The thought surprised her with its appeal. The mountain was harsh and isolating, but it was also honest. No pretense, no judgment, just the clean brutality of survival and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. She could build something here, something real. But first, she had to finish healing. And that meant trusting Elias Varn, trusting that his methods would work, that his intentions were genuine, that she hadn't made a terrible mistake climbing this mountain. So far, he'd given her no reason to doubt. Lena pressed her bandaged hand against the cold window glass and made herself a promise. She would heal. She would get strong. And she would prove to everyone who dismissed her, especially herself, that she was worth saving. The mountain didn't care about her past. Neither did Elias. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed. The first real test of Lena's resolve came on a Tuesday morning in late February, 6 weeks after she'd climbed the mountain. She was in the barn milking the cow, a task her healing hands could finally manage, when she heard voices outside. Male voices, unfamiliar, carrying the rough edge of men who'd traveled far and weren't happy about it. Lena set down the pail and moved to the barn door. Through the gap, she could see 2 men on horseback talking to Elias in front of the cabin. They wore heavy coats crusted with road dust, and one had a rifle across his saddle. "We heard you taking patients," the one with the rifle was saying. "Need you to look at my brother." Elias's posture was relaxed but alert. "What's wrong with him?" "Took an axe to the leg 3 days ago. Bleeding stopped, but it's gone bad. Smells wrong." "Where is he?" The man jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Back at camp, 2 miles down. Couldn't get him on a horse." Elias was already moving toward the cabin. "Give me 10 minutes to get my kit." Lena emerged from the barn as the men dismounted to wait. They noticed her immediately, their eyes tracking over her with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. She'd gotten used to Elias's clinical detachment, had almost forgotten how other men looked at women. "Who's that?" the one without a rifle asked. "Patient," Elias said shortly, reappearing with a worn leather bag. "She's staying here. Don't bother her." "Wasn't planning to bother her." The man grinned. "Just being friendly." "Be friendly somewhere else." Elias swung up onto one of his horses. Lena hadn't even known he kept horses until now. They must have been in a separate pasture. "Lena, I'll be back by nightfall. Keep the door barred." She nodded, understanding the unspoken message. These men might be legitimate patients seeking help, or they might be something else. Either way, she was to trust no one until Elias returned. The three riders disappeared into the trees, leaving Lana alone with a silence that suddenly felt oppressive. She finished the milking with shaking hands, carried the pail inside, and barred the door as instructed. Then she waited. The day crawled past. She tried to keep busy, cleaned the already clean cabin, fed the chickens twice, reorganized the medical supplies she had no business touching. Her mind conjured increasingly dark scenarios. What if the men turned on Elias? What if he didn't come back? What if more strangers showed up while she was alone? She'd grown soft up here, she realized, protected by Elias's presence, by the mountain's isolation. But the frontier didn't care about safety. It took what it wanted and left the weak behind. Dusk was settling when she heard hoofbeats. Lena grabbed the rifle Elias kept by the door. She'd never fired one, but maybe the threat would be enough, and positioned herself away from the window. "It's me," Elias called. "Open up." She unbarred the door with relief so intense it made her dizzy. Elias came in looking tired and blood-spattered, his bag heavier than when he'd left. "How bad?" Lena asked. "Bad enough. Leg was septic, gangrene starting, had to amputate below the knee." He set the bag down heavily. "He'll live if infection doesn't set in, but he won't be swinging an axe anytime soon." Did they pay? $2 and a haunch of venison. He moved to the basin to wash. Not much, but they didn't have more. Lena watched him scrub the blood from his hands with methodical thoroughness. "You do that a lot? Go to patients instead of having them come here?" "When I have to." He dried his hands on a clean cloth. "Most can't make the climb if they're truly sick. Someone has to go to them. That's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous." He met her eyes. "You climbed up here alone in the dark. Was that safe?" "No." "But you did it anyway, because staying was more dangerous." He crossed to the stove where Lena had kept stew warm. "Same principle applies. Those men needed help. I provided it. Done." But it wasn't done. Not for Lena. She'd seen something in those men's eyes that bothered her, something hungry and calculating. And she'd seen how Elias had positioned himself between them and her without seeming to, how he'd made it clear she was off limits. He'd protected her. The realization sat strange in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you said about me being a patient." Elias ladled stew into a bowl. "That's what you are. You know what I mean." He did. She could tell by the way his shoulders tensed. But he didn't acknowledge it, just sat down to eat with the same focused silence he brought to everything. Lena let it go. She was learning that Elias communicated through actions, not words. He could spend all day in silence, but show more care in how he adjusted a bandage than most people managed with 1,000 pretty phrases. That night, lying in her small room, she heard him moving around the main cabin for hours. Checking the door, the windows, cleaning his instruments, making sure everything was secure, protecting what was his, the cabin, the supplies, the patient under his care. She fell asleep to the sound of his careful vigilance and slept better than she had in weeks. The next morning brought new tension. Elias was at the table when Lena emerged, studying a piece of paper with a frown that carved deep lines around his mouth. "What's wrong?" He pushed the paper across the table. It was a notice, official-looking, stamped with some kind of seal. Lena scanned the dense text, struggling to parse the legal language. "I don't understand." "County Medical Board," Elias said flatly. "They're threatening to shut me down unless I submit to an inspection and prove I'm practicing safe and ethical medicine." "Can they do that?" "They can try." He took the paper back, jaw tight. "Harrison's been filing complaints. Says I'm endangering patients with experimental treatments, practicing without proper oversight, corrupting vulnerable women." The last part made Lena's blood run hot. "That's about me." "Probably." Elias stood, agitation showing in the sharpness of his movements. "He saw you leave town, put two and two together. Now he's making it his crusade to save you from the dangerous mountain hermit." "I don't need saving." "Try telling him that." He paced to the window, staring out at the forest. "This is what they do. Can't accept that someone might practice medicine differently, might get results they can't. So they use the law to destroy what they don't understand." Lena studied the rigid line of his back, seeing the old anger there, the old wound that had driven him from Boston. "What happens if they shut you down?" I stop treating patients, or I keep treating them and end up in jail for practicing without a license. His laugh was bitter. Either way, people who need help don't get it. There has to be something you can do. Fight it somehow. Fight it how? I've got no standing with the medical board. Harrison's a licensed physician with connections back east. I'm just the crazy hermit who thinks he knows better than trained doctors. He turned to face her. It's my word against his, and my word doesn't count for much. Lena looked down at her hands. The bandages were lighter now, changed every 3 days instead of daily. Underneath, her skin was healing, not perfect, still marked by scars and patches of sensitivity, but functional, whole. My word might count, she said slowly. Elias went still. What? I'm proof that your methods work. Harrison refused to treat me. You did. I'm healing. She met his eyes. Let me testify. Tell them what happened. No. The refusal was immediate and absolute. Why not? Because Harrison will destroy you. Elias crossed back to the table, gripping the edge. He'll stand up there and tell everyone you're delusional, that I've manipulated you, that you're too damaged to think clearly. He'll make you look like a fool or worse. Let him try. Lena, you saved my life. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. You gave me back my hands, my future, everything. I'm not going to stand by and let them take that away from other people just because Harrison's too scared to try something new. Elias stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. You don't owe me this. Maybe not, but I'm offering anyway. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 40-some years. They'll ask questions, personal questions, about your condition, about living here, about everything. I know. They'll make assumptions, about us, about what happens in this cabin. I know that too. Lena pulled out the chair across from him. I lived in Ridgemont for 2 years. I know how people think, what they say. I stopped caring about their assumptions when they let me rot rather than help me. Elias rubbed a hand over his face. This is a mistake. Probably, but I'm making it anyway. She reached across the table, her scarred hand covering his. Let me help you, please. He looked at their joined hands, something complicated moving across his face. Then he nodded once, sharp and quick, like he was committing to something he'd regret. All right, but when this goes bad, don't say I didn't warn you. The inspection was scheduled for the first week of March. Elias spent the intervening days in a state of controlled fury, organizing his notes, cataloging his supplies, preparing documentation for every treatment he'd performed in the past 5 years. Lena had never seen him this tense, this tightly wound. She helped where she could, but mostly she stayed out of his way and tried not to think about what was coming. The idea of facing Doctor. Harrison again made her stomach clench, but she'd meant what she'd said. Elias had given her back her life. She wouldn't abandon him when he needed her. The inspectors arrived on a cold Tuesday morning, 3 men on horseback dressed in dark suits that looked absurd in the wilderness. Dr. Harrison rode with them, his expression smug and righteous. Lena watched from the cabin window as they dismounted. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them still. She'd faced worse than this. She'd climbed a mountain in the dark with rotting flesh. She could face down pompous men in suits. Elias opened the door before they could knock. Gentlemen? The lead inspector was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a pinched mouth. Mr. Varn, I'm Dr. Edmund Pierce from the County Medical Board. We're here to conduct the inspection as outlined in our correspondence. Of course, Elias stepped aside. Come in. They filed into this cabin, their eyes moving over everything with the kind of scrutiny that missed nothing. Harrison came last, his gaze landing on Lena with something between satisfaction and disgust. Miss Cross, I see you survived your foolish decision. I did more than survive, Lena said evenly. I got help, real help. Harrison's jaw tightened. We'll see about that. Dr. Pierce cleared his throat. Mr. Varn, we'll need to see your treatment facilities, your supplies, and documentation of your patient cases. We'll also be interviewing any current patients. His gaze flickered to Lena. Starting with Miss Cross. I expected as much. Elias gestured to the examination area. Everything's ready for your review. The next 2 hours were excruciating. The inspectors poked through every corner of the cabin, examined every bottle and instrument, questioned every choice Elias had made. He answered with cold precision, providing documentation and explaining his reasoning without emotion or defensiveness. Harrison interjected constantly, pointing out deviations from standard practice, questioning Elias's credentials, implying nefarious motivations. The other inspectors listened with increasingly skeptical expressions. Finally, Dr. Pierce turned to Lena. Miss Cross, we'd like to speak with you privately. Mr. Varn, please step outside. Elias met her eyes. The message was clear. She could still back out. She gave a tiny shake of her head. He left without a word. Dr. Pierce settled into a chair across from Lena, while the other 2 inspectors flanked him. Harrison stood by the window, arms crossed, radiating smug anticipation. Miss Cross, Dr. Pierce began, we need to understand the nature of your relationship with Mr. Varn and the circumstances that led you here. I came here for medical treatment, Lena said. That's the relationship. Doctor, Harrison tells us you arrived in January, alone, and have been living here since. Is that correct? Yes. And in that time, what exactly has Mr. Varn's treatment entailed? Lena kept her voice steady. He diagnosed my condition as psoriasis with secondary infection. He developed a topical treatment using medicinal herbs and oversaw daily wound care. He also provided housing while I healed since I had nowhere else to go. He examined you physically? Of course. You can't diagnose a skin condition without looking at it. Harrison stepped forward. Miss Cross, you must understand how this appears. A young woman, desperate and vulnerable, alone with a man of questionable reputation in an isolated location. We're concerned you may have been coerced or manipulated. Heat flooded Lena's face, but it was anger, not shame. Coerced into what? Getting medical care I desperately needed? Dr. Harrison, you threw me out of your office without even examining me. You called me your kind like I was carrying plague. Do you remember that? Harrison's face went red. I had legitimate concerns about contagion. You were afraid of what people would think if you treated someone who looked sick. There's a difference. Lena stood, rolling up her sleeves to show the healing skin. This is what Elias Varn did. He looked at what you were too scared to examine and he fixed it. If that's questionable medicine, then I'd hate to see what you call legitimate. Miss Cross, Dr. Pierce interjected, we're not questioning whether you've improved. We're questioning Mr. Varn's methods and motivations. His motivation was to help me. His method was actual medicine instead of moral judgment. She looked at each of them in turn. I climbed this mountain because I was dying and no one in town would help. Elias gave me treatment, housing, and dignity when everyone else gave me rejection. So yes, I've been living here. Yes, he examined me. And yes, every single moment of it was professional and necessary. You're defending him because you're dependent on him, Harrison said. That's exactly the kind of manipulation we're concerned about. I'm defending him because he's a better doctor than you'll ever be. The words hung in the air. Harrison's face went from red to purple. Dr. Pierce exchanged glances with the other inspectors. Miss Cross, one of them said carefully, are you saying you felt safe throughout your treatment? Safer than I did in Ridgemont. She met his eyes. Elias Varn gave me informed consent before every treatment. He explained what he was doing and why. He gave me privacy when I needed it and space when I asked for it. That's more respect than I got from anyone in town. But you understand how irregular this is, Dr. Pierce pressed. A single man, a female patient, living together unchaperoned. We're on a mountain miles from anywhere, Lena interrupted. Where exactly was he supposed to find a chaperone? And why would I need one? I came here for medical treatment, not a tea party. Harrison made a disgusted sound. This is precisely the problem. Mr. Varn has created an environment where vulnerable women feel they have no choice but to accept inappropriate conditions. The only inappropriate thing here is you using my medical condition to pursue a vendetta. Lena's hands were shaking again, but she didn't hide them. You want to shut him down because he makes you look bad, because he helped me when you wouldn't even try. That's enough, Dr. Pierce said sharply. Miss Cross, please step outside. We need to confer privately. Lena found Elias waiting by the barn, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. When he saw her, something in his posture relaxed fractionally. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad." She sagged against the wall beside him. "Harrison's pushing hard. They think you manipulated me." "I know. I told them the truth." "I know that too." He looked at her sideways. "Thank you for trying. It's not over yet." "It is." His voice was quiet, resigned. "They've already decided. Harrison brought them here to confirm what they believe, not to investigate fairly. They'll shut me down and feel righteous about it. Then we fight back. Get other patients to testify. Show them all the people you've helped." "Lena." He caught her shoulder, gentle but firm. "It won't matter. This is how it works. The establishment protects itself, and people like me get crushed." She wanted to argue, but the defeat in his eyes stopped her. He'd been through this before, back in Boston. He knew how this story ended. They stood in silence until the cabin door opened and Dr. Pierce emerged with the others. His expression was grave but satisfied, the look of a man who'd confirmed his suspicions. "Mr. Varn, after careful review, we find significant irregularities in your practice. You're operating without proper licensing, using unproven treatments, and maintaining inappropriate relationships with vulnerable patients." "Inappropriate?" Lena started forward, but Elias's hand on her arm stopped her. "Let him finish," Elias said quietly. Dr. Pierce continued. "Effective immediately, you are to cease all medical practice pending a formal hearing before the Territorial Medical Board. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges." He paused. "Miss Cross, we strongly recommend you return to town and seek proper medical care." "My medical care is fine right where I am," Lena shot back. Harrison stepped forward. "Miss Cross, we're offering you a way out. You don't have to stay here out of misplaced loyalty or fear." "I'm not afraid of anything except going back to that town." She moved to stand beside Elias. "And I'm not leaving." The inspectors exchanged glances. Dr. Pierce's expression hardened. "Then you do so at your own risk." "Mr. Varn, you've been warned. No further medical practice." They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving a silence that felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Elias stood motionless for a long moment. Then he turned and walked into the cabin without a word. Lena followed. She found him at the table, staring at his medical supplies, with an expression of such profound loss it made her chest ache. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not your fault. I should have argued better, said something different. Wouldn't have mattered." He picked up one of his bottles, turning it in his hands. "They made their decision before they arrived. You did what you could." It wasn't enough. It was more than most would have done. He set the bottle down carefully. "You should go to Ridgemont, before they come back." Lena stared at him. "What?" "They'll enforce this. If I keep practicing, I'll end up in jail. If you stay here, they'll say I'm holding you against your will." His voice was flat, empty. "It's over, Lena. Time to cut losses." "No. This isn't a negotiation." "You're right. It's not." She planted her hands on the table. "I'm not leaving, and you're not giving up." "There's nothing left to fight for." "There's everything." The words burst out louder than she intended. "There are people who need you, people Harrison won't help." "What about them?" "What about them? I can't help anyone from a jail cell." "Then we find another way." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Elias, you saved my life. You can't just quit because some pompous men with papers said so." "I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." Her grip tightened. "You taught me that. When I climbed this mountain, I chose to fight instead of giving up. Now I'm asking you to do the same." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, hope, fear all tangled together. "If I keep practicing, they'll come back with the law. They'll arrest me." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Lena released his arm but didn't step back. "But we don't surrender before the fight's even started." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, we fight. But if this goes wrong, it won't." "You don't know that." "No, she admitted. But I know you don't belong in a cage any more than I belonged rotting in that boarding house, so we figure it out. Together. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Elias cleared his throat and turned back to his supplies. But Lena saw his shoulders straighten, saw purpose return to his movements. They spent the rest of the day in tense silence, both aware that the inspector's departure was just the beginning. Harrison wouldn't let this go. The medical board would be watching. One wrong move and Elias would end up exactly where he'd feared. But as night fell and Lena helped prepare dinner with hands that barely hurt anymore, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't just a patient anymore, grateful but passive. She was part of this now, part of whatever came next. And if Harrison wanted to destroy Elias Varn, he'd have to go through her first. The confrontation came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days after the inspection, Lena was splitting wood behind the cabin when she heard horses. Not the careful approach of patients seeking help, but the aggressive rhythm of men who expected compliance. She set down the axe and moved toward the front of the cabin just as Elias emerged, his face already set in hard lines. 6 riders this time. Dr. Harrison led them, flanked by 2 men wearing deputy badges and 3 others who looked like they'd been pulled from the saloon for muscle. They pulled up in a semicircle, blocking any easy retreat. "Varn," Harrison called out, not bothering to dismount. "We're here for Miss Cross." Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between the riders and the cabin door. "She's not going anywhere." "That's not your decision to make." Harrison's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already won. "Miss Cross has been living here under duress, manipulated by your false promises of medical care. We're taking her back to town where she can receive proper treatment." "I don't want your treatment," Lena said, moving to stand beside Elias. "I told you that 3 days ago." Harrison finally dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. "You don't know what you want. You've been isolated here, subjected to experimental procedures, cut off from rational counsel. That's not informed consent, that's manipulation." "I know exactly what I want." Lena held up her hands, the scars visible but the wounds closed, the skin functional. "I want to keep healing. I want to stay here. And I want you to leave." One of the deputies shifted in his saddle. "Ma'am, Dr. Harrison has filed a formal complaint alleging you're being held here against your will. We need you to come back to town so we can sort this out proper." "I'm not being held anywhere. I'm staying by choice." "Choice made under coercion isn't really choice," Harrison said smoothly. "That's why we're here, to give you the opportunity to leave safely." Elias's hands curled into fists at his sides. "She's told you multiple times she doesn't want to go. You're not deaf, Harrison. You're just arrogant enough to think you know what's best for everyone." "I know what's legal, and what you're doing here isn't." Harrison pulled out another official-looking document. "This is a cease and desist order from the Territorial Medical Board. You're to immediately stop all medical practice and surrender any patients currently under your care for proper evaluation." "Surrender patients." Elias's voice went dangerously quiet. "Like they're property. Like they're people who need real medical attention, not whatever folk remedies you're peddling up here." Harrison stepped closer, emboldened by his backup. "Face it, Varn, your little rebellion is over. You either comply with the board's orders or you go to jail. And Miss Cross either comes with us willingly or we take her anyway for her own protection." Lena felt something snap inside her chest. She'd spent 6 months in Ridgemont being judged, dismissed, treated like her illness made her less than human. She'd climbed a mountain in the dark and put her life in the hands of a stranger because no one else would help. She'd endured painful treatments and slow healing and the constant fear that she'd made a terrible mistake. And now these men, these same men who'd turned their backs when she needed them, were here to drag her back to their version of salvation. "No," she said. Harrison turned to her with practiced patience. "Miss Cross?" "I said no." Lena moved forward until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the veins in his neck, the self-righteousness burning in his eyes. "You want to know what manipulation looks like, Doctor Harrison? It's you standing in my examination room telling me you don't treat my kind. It's the whole town crossing the street to avoid me because I had a skin condition that scared them. It's you showing up here with badges and guns to force me back into your care after you refused to give it when I begged. You were visibly diseased. I was sick, and you were scared. Her voice rose. Elias Varn wasn't scared. He looked at what you couldn't stomach examining, and he helped me. So no, I'm not going with you. No, I don't want your proper treatment. And no, you don't get to call this rescue when it's just control dressed up as concern. Harrison's face went red. You're making a mistake. It's mine to make. One of the saloon men spoke up. Doc, maybe we should just... We're not leaving without her. Harrison grabbed Lena's arm. You're coming back to town if I have to carry you myself. Elias moved before Lena could react. He caught Harrison's wrist and twisted, forcing the doctor to release her with a yelp of pain. Don't touch her. The deputies went for their weapons. The saloon men dismounted. Suddenly everyone was shouting, moving, and Lena found herself shoved behind Elias as the situation spiraled toward violence. Stand down! One of the deputies had his pistol drawn, pointed at Elias. Step away from the doctor, Varn. Tell him to keep his hands to himself, Elias growled, but he released Harrison and raised his hands slowly. Harrison stumbled back, cradling his wrist, his expression twisted with fury and humiliation. That's assault. You just assaulted a licensed physician in front of witnesses. You grabbed her first. I was attempting to provide medical assistance to a woman clearly unable to make rational decisions. Harrison straightened, regaining his composure. Deputies, arrest this man for assault and practicing medicine without a license. And someone get Miss Cross on a horse. She's coming with us. The second deputy moved toward Lena. She backed up, her mind racing. They were serious. They were actually going to arrest Elias and drag her away, and there was nothing either of them could do against 6 armed men. Then she heard it, more horses, coming fast from the direction of the trail. Everyone turned as 4 riders burst into the clearing. Lena recognized them immediately. The 2 brothers whose leg Elias had amputated, a woman Lena had seen once leaving the cabin with a baby in her arms, and an older man who'd come for treatment of a hand injury last month. They pulled up in a line facing Harrison and his men, and the brother with the rifle, the same one who'd fetched Elias weeks ago, trained it on the deputies with casual confidence. Heard there was trouble up here, he said. Thought we'd ride over, make sure nobody was doing anything stupid. Harrison's face went from red to purple. This is official business. Official business assaulting a woman? The woman with the baby spoke up, her voice sharp. Because that's what it looked like from down the trail. We're attempting to rescue Miss Cross from an unsafe situation. Rescue. The older man spat into the dirt. That what you call it when someone says no and you grab them anyway? One of the deputies lowered his weapon slightly, looking uncertain. Dr. Harrison, maybe we should complete our duty. But Harrison's voice had lost some of its conviction. He glanced at the 4 newcomers, clearly calculating odds. This man is practicing medicine illegally. That's a criminal offense. So's assault, the brother with the rifle said. So's kidnapping. You want to talk about criminal offenses? We can do that. But first you're going to get back on those horses and ride out of here. You're threatening law enforcement. I'm protecting a woman who said she doesn't want to go with you. The rifle didn't waver. Seems pretty straightforward to me. The tension stretched thin enough to break. Lena could see Harrison weighing his options, could see the moment he realized he'd overplayed his hand. He'd brought men expecting an easy extraction of a helpless woman. Instead, he'd found resistance, witnesses, and people willing to fight. This isn't over, Harrison said finally, his voice tight. The medical board will hear about this, all of it. Good, Lena said. Tell them everything. Tell them how you grabbed me. Tell them how 6 men rode up here to force a woman back to town against her will. Tell them all of it. Harrison mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. The deputies followed, looking relieved to be leaving. The saloon men scrambled up behind them. You're making a mistake, Miss Cross, Harrison called as they turned to go. When this all falls apart, don't expect anyone in Ridgemont to help you. I learned that lesson 6 months ago, Lena shot back. That's why I left. They rode away in a cloud of dust and impotent fury, leaving silence in their wake. Lena's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the ground, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaking. Elias crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. You all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The 4 riders dismounted. The brother with the rifle, whose name Lena finally remembered was Thomas, approached with a slight smile. Hell of a speech. Thanks for the backup. Elias stood, helping Lena to her feet. How'd you know to come? Saw them riding up the trail from our camp, recognized Harrison, and figured nothing good was coming from that. Thomas lowered the rifle. Figured you might need friendly faces. The woman stepped forward, shifting the baby on her hip. I'm Sarah. You helped me when this one decided to come early and backwards. My husband's family are the Prestons. We own land 2 valleys over. She looked at Lena with frank assessment. You really want to stay here? Yes. Even knowing they'll come back? Because Harrison's not the type to let this go. I know. Lena met her eyes. But I'm not the type to roll over because someone with a badge tells me to. Sarah's mouth quirked. Good. We need more of that around here. She turned to Elias. My husband's going to want to meet you both. He's been talking about bringing other families to testify about your work. Make it harder for the board to shut you down. That's dangerous for all of you, Elias said. So's living out here without someone who knows how to set a bone or deliver a baby when things go wrong. The older man spoke up. His name was Coleman, and his hand still bore the scars from the injury Elias had treated. Harrison serves folks in town who can pay his fees and don't ask questions. Rest of us got nothing. You want to fight the board? We'll fight with you. Lena saw something shift in Elias's face, a crack in the resignation that had settled over him after the inspection. He'd been alone on this mountain for years, fighting his battles in isolation. But maybe he didn't have to be alone anymore. I'll talk to Preston, he said finally, but I won't ask anyone to risk themselves for me. You're not asking, Thomas said. We're offering. There's a difference. They stayed for another hour, sharing information about who else might be willing to stand up to the medical board, discussing strategies for building a case. By the time they left, Lena could see something like hope kindling in Elias's eyes. That night, as they prepared dinner in the cabin's warm glow, the weight of what had happened settled over them both. You didn't have to do that, Elias said quietly, chopping vegetables with methodical precision. Stand up to Harrison like that. It would have been easier to just go. Easier doesn't mean right. Lena stirred the pot on the stove, watching steam rise. Besides, I meant what I said. I'm not going back. You might not have a choice if they come with a court order. Then we'll fight the court order. She glanced at him. You said we fight together, remember? That goes both ways. Elias set down the knife and turned to face her fully. Why? Why what? Why are you doing this? You could walk away, find another town, start over somewhere that doesn't know about the skin condition. Instead, you're making yourself a target for Harrison's crusade. His voice was rough. Why? Lena considered the question, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because for 6 months, I thought I was dying alone. Thought the world had decided I wasn't worth saving, and then you proved me wrong. She met his eyes. You didn't just fix my hands, Elias. You gave me back the idea that I mattered, that I deserved help even when I couldn't pay for it, even when I looked wrong, even when no one else wanted to bother. I was just doing my job. No, you were being decent. There's a difference. She moved closer, and I'm not going to let them punish you for that, not without a fight. Something in his expression cracked open, revealing the loneliness underneath, the years of exile, the quiet conviction that he'd always be fighting alone. Lena recognized it because she'd carried the same wound herself. I don't know how to do this, Elias said finally. Let people help. Trust that they won't turn on me when things get hard. I don't either, but we can figure it out together. He nodded slowly, then turned back to cooking with the matter closed. But Lena saw his shoulders settle, saw some of the tension bleed out of him. It wasn't much. Elias Varn wasn't the type to transform overnight, but it was a start. They ate dinner in companionable silence, both lost in thought about what came next. Harrison wouldn't give up. The medical board had power and legitimacy on their side. But now Elias had something too, people willing to fight for him. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The next 2 weeks passed in tense preparation. Word spread through the mountain communities about Harrison's attempt to forcibly remove Lena, and the response was swift. Families who'd used Elias's services over the years started showing up to offer support. Some brought supplies, others offered testimony. A few even suggested hiding Elias if the law came for him. Lena found herself thrust into an unexpected role: organizer. She compiled lists of patients, documented treatments and outcomes, coordinated with families willing to testify. Her hands were steady enough now for writing, and she discovered she had a talent for cutting through complications and finding the core of an argument. "You should have been a lawyer," Elias observed one evening, watching her organize yet another stack of treatment notes. "Couldn't afford the schooling. Besides, lawyers don't get their hands dirty." She held up her scarred palms. "I prefer work that shows." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his whole face. "You're good at this. Building a case, rallying people, better than I ever was. You were too busy actually healing people to worry about politics. And look where that got me." But there was no bitterness in his voice, just observation. The Territorial Medical Board hearing was scheduled for the third week of March in Cooperton, 3 days' ride from the mountain. Elias prepared like a general going to war, organizing documentation, rehearsing testimony, anticipating every argument Harrison might make. Lena watched him work himself into exhaustion and finally intervened the night before they were set to leave. "You need to sleep." "I need to be ready." "You're ready. You've been ready for weeks." She took the papers from his hands. "What you need is to rest so you don't collapse in front of the board." Elias rubbed his eyes, looking every year of his age. What if it's not enough? What if we show them everything and they still side with Harrison? Then we deal with it. But we don't lose before we've even fought. You're very certain for someone who's about to testify in front of people who'll try to destroy your credibility. Lena thought about that. I've already been destroyed once. Lost my business, my reputation, my health. Harrison and his board can't take anything I haven't already survived losing. She met his eyes. The question is whether you can handle them questioning your work, your methods, your integrity. I've been through it before, but not with people standing beside you. That's different. Harder, maybe, because now it's not just your reputation at risk, it's theirs too. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. You're right, about all of it. He stood, gathering the papers. Said, get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. But as Lena lay in her small room that night, listening to the mountain wind and thinking about the hearing to come, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Whatever Harrison threw at them, whatever the board decided, she'd face it standing tall. She'd climbed a mountain in the dark to save herself. Speaking truth in a hearing room would be easy by comparison. They left before dawn, Elias on horseback and Lena riding the gentler mare he kept for patients who needed transport. 5 other riders accompanied them, Thomas and his brother, Sarah and her husband James Preston, and Coleman. A small army, but an army nonetheless. The journey to Cooperton took 2.5 days of hard riding. They camped rough the first night, sharing stories around the fire about Elias's treatments and close calls. Lena listened to them talk about broken bones set perfectly, infections stopped before they turned deadly, births that should have killed mother and child but didn't. You saved my daughter's life, James Preston said quietly, staring into the flames. Sarah was bleeding out and the midwife had given up. You showed up and just fixed it, like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing, Elias said. It was careful pressure and timing and luck. Call it what you want. My wife's alive because of you. My daughter's alive. That's worth fighting for. The second night they stayed in a boarding house on Cooperton's outskirts. Elias barely slept. Lena could hear him pacing in the room above hers, restless and anxious. She understood. Tomorrow everything changed, one way or another. The hearing was held in Cooperton's courthouse, a grand building that dwarfed anything in Ridgemont. Lena felt small walking up its steps, but she kept her head high and her shoulders back. She dressed in her one good dress, carefully mended and cleaned. Her hands were still scarred but functional, and she wore no gloves. Let them see what Elias had accomplished. The hearing room was already packed. Dr. Harrison sat at one table with 2 other physicians Lena didn't recognize, all wearing expensive suits and expressions of professional concern. The medical board occupied the front of the room, 5 men in dark clothing who looked like they'd already made their decision. Elias sat at the other table alone until Lena joined him, sliding into the chair at his side. He glanced at her with something like gratitude. The head of the board, a white-haired man named Dr. Castellan, called the hearing to order. We're here to review complaints filed against Elias Varn regarding unauthorized medical practice, unsafe treatment methods, and patient welfare concerns. Dr. Harrison, you may present your case. What followed was 2 hours of systematic character assassination. Harrison painted Elias as a dangerous charlatan who preyed on vulnerable people, using experimental treatments and isolation to maintain control. He produced testimony from people in Ridgemont who'd heard rumors about the mountain healer, none of whom had actually seen Elias's work. He described Lena as a victim of manipulation, too traumatized and dependent to recognize her own exploitation. Lena sat through it all with clenched fists, forcing herself to stay silent while Harrison twisted everything into something ugly. Finally, Dr. Castellan turned to Elias. "Mr. Varn, you may respond." Elias stood slowly. For a moment, Lena thought he might fold under the weight of Harrison's accusations. Then he straightened, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "Everything Dr. Harrison said is a lie built on fear and professional jealousy. I don't prey on vulnerable people. I help them when no one else will. I don't use experimental treatments. I use methods that work, regardless of whether they're traditional. And I don't manipulate patients. I give them informed consent, treatment options, and the dignity of choice." He pulled out his documentation, laying out case after case of successful treatments. Broken bones healed without infection. Diseases cured. Lives saved. The evidence was meticulous, undeniable. "Dr. Harrison wants you to shut me down because I make him look bad," Elias continued. "Because people come to me after he's failed them, and I succeed where he didn't even try. That's not malpractice, that's competition, and he's using this board to eliminate it." Harrison shot to his feet. "That's a baseless accusation." "Is it?" Elias turned to face him directly. "You refused to examine Miss Cross because her condition scared you. You called her your kind and threw her out of your office. That's not medicine. That's cowardice." "I had legitimate concerns about contagion." "Then you should have examined her to determine if those concerns were valid. Instead, you made a judgment based on appearance and sent her away to die." Elias's voice went hard. "I examined her. I diagnosed her. I treated her. And she's healing. That's the difference between us, Harrison. I actually do the work." The room erupted. Dr. Castellan banged his gavel for order, but the damage was done. Harrison's face was scarlet with rage, and even the other board members looked uncomfortable. "Miss Cross," Dr. Castellan said when order was restored, "you're listed as a witness. Please approach." Lena stood on shaking legs and made her way to the front. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She felt naked, exposed, but she'd promised to do this. For Elias. For herself. "Miss Cross," Dr. Castellan began, "Dr. Harrison has characterized you as a victim of Mr. Varn's manipulation. How do you respond?" Lena looked at Harrison, then at the board, then at Elias. She took a breath and began to speak. "I respond," Lena said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "by saying that Dr. Harrison doesn't know the difference between manipulation and medicine." She held up her hands, turning them so everyone could see the scars, the healed tissue, the fingers that moved freely despite months of damage. 6 months ago, these hands were rotting. The skin cracked and wept, and the pain kept me awake at night. I couldn't work, couldn't dress myself properly, couldn't do anything except watch my body fall apart and wait to die. Dr. Castellan leaned forward. "And you sought treatment from Dr. Harrison?" I begged for it. The memory still stung. "I went to his office with what money I had and asked him to examine me. He took one look at my bandages and told me to get out, said he didn't treat my kind. I had legitimate concerns," Harrison started. "You had fear," Lena cut him off, turning to face him directly. "Fear of what people would think if you treated someone who looked sick. Fear of a condition you didn't immediately recognize. So you hid behind moral judgment and sent me away." "Miss Cross," one of the other board members interjected, "surely you understand Dr. Harrison's caution. Without knowing what disease you carried, it wasn't a disease, it was psoriasis." Lena's voice sharpened. "Elias Varn diagnosed it in 10 minutes of actual examination, 10 minutes of doing what Dr. Harrison was too scared to do, look at me like I was a patient instead of a problem." She took a breath, steadying herself. The room was absolutely silent now, every person hanging on her words. "You want to know about manipulation?" Lena continued. Manipulation is what happened in Ridgemont. My landlord evicted me because other tenants complained. My customers stopped coming because they were afraid to be associated with someone who looked diseased. People I'd known for 2 years crossed the street to avoid me. That's manipulation, using fear and social pressure to make someone disappear. That's not the same as medical malpractice, Harrison said. You're right, it's worse, because at least Elias Varn was honest about what he could offer. Lena turned back to the board. He told me the treatment would be painful, told me it would take months, told me exactly what he was using and why. He gave me a choice, stay and heal or leave and die. I chose to stay. That's not manipulation, that's informed consent. Dr. Castellan studied her with shrewd eyes. And the living arrangements? Dr. Harrison has raised concerns about propriety. Propriety. Lena almost laughed. I was dying. Where exactly was I supposed to stay while healing? In town with people who wouldn't rent to me? On the mountain alone in winter? She shook her head. Elias Varn gave me a room, privacy, and professional treatment. If that's improper, then I don't understand what proper means anymore. But surely you can see how it appears, another board member said carefully. A young woman alone with an unmarried man. If you're implying what I think you're implying, say it clearly, Lena interrupted. Don't hide behind words like appears and propriety. If you think something happened, accuse me directly. The board member flushed. I'm simply noting that the arrangement was unconventional. So is amputating a leg on a camp table 2 miles from the nearest shelter. But Thomas Clayton is alive because Elias Varn did it anyway. Lena gestured to where Thomas sat in the gallery. So is delivering a breech baby in a cabin during a snowstorm. But Sarah Preston and her daughter are both healthy. Unconventional isn't the same as wrong. The board's concern, Dr. Castellan said, is whether Mr. Varn's methods meet accepted medical standards. Whose standards? Because, Doctor, Harrison's standards involve turning away patients he's afraid to touch. If those are the accepted standards, then I'm glad Elias Varn rejected them. Harrison slammed his hand on the table. This is exactly what I warned about. Miss Cross has been so thoroughly manipulated that she can't see her own victimization. I can see it perfectly, Lena shot back. I was victimized by a town that valued reputation over compassion. Victimized by a doctor who cared more about his comfort than my suffering. And now I'm being victimized again by men who want to punish the only person who helped me. The room erupted into arguments. Dr. Castellan banged his gavel repeatedly, finally restoring order. He looked exhausted, like this hearing had gone places he hadn't anticipated. Miss Cross, you may sit down. We'll hear from other witnesses. What followed was a parade of testimony that painted a picture completely opposite to Harrison's accusations. Thomas Clayton described the leg amputation in brutal detail, explaining how Elias had worked for 3 hours to save his brother's life when any other doctor would have let him die rather than operate in the field. Sarah Preston spoke about her difficult delivery, voice breaking as she described the moment Elias had pulled her daughter free and gotten her breathing. Coleman showed his hand, fully functional despite an injury that should have left him crippled. One by one, they stood and told their stories. Not polished or rehearsed, but raw and real. The truth of survival, of pain endured and overcome, of a healer who went where he was needed instead of waiting for patients to come to him. Harrison tried to discredit each one, suggesting they were exaggerating, that traditional medicine could have achieved the same results, that their loyalty to Varn clouded their judgment. But the evidence was harder to dismiss when it stood in front of you, breathing and whole. By the time the last witness finished, it was late afternoon. Dr. Castellan looked at his fellow board members, then at Elias. Mr. Varn, the board will deliberate and render our decision tomorrow morning. You're dismissed until then. Outside the courthouse, Lena felt her legs finally give out. She sat on the steps, hands shaking with released tension. Elias sat beside her, equally drained. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did. You made yourself a target. Harrison will never forgive being called a coward in public. Good. Lena looked at her scarred hands. Let him be angry. I'm tired of men like him deciding who deserves help and who doesn't. Thomas approached with the others, grinning despite the tension. That was something. You tore into him like a wildcat. He deserved worse. Maybe. But you gave him what he needed. Truth in front of witnesses. Sarah shifted her baby to the other hip. Whatever the board decides, everyone in that room knows Harrison threw you out, and Elias saved you. Doesn't mean they'll rule in our favor, James Preston said grimly. The board's made up of doctors like Harrison. They protect their own. Elias stood, brushing dust from his pants. Then we'll deal with that tomorrow. Tonight, we rest. They found rooms at a better boarding house this time, one that served dinner in a common room. The conversation was subdued, everyone aware that tomorrow could end with Elias in jail or banned from practice permanently. But there was also something else, something that hadn't been there before. A sense of solidarity, of having fought together regardless of outcome. Lena picked at her food, her stomach too knotted to eat properly. Across the table, Elias was equally quiet, lost in thoughts she couldn't read. Finally, when the others had drifted away to their rooms, Lena found herself alone with him in the empty common room. "What will you do if they rule against you?" she asked. Elias stared into his coffee. "Leave, probably. Head further west where the territorial board has no jurisdiction. Start over somewhere else. And your patients here? Find another doctor or learn to manage without one." His jaw tightened. "It's not ideal, but it's better than jail." Lena traced patterns in the wood grain of the table. "What if I came with you?" He looked up sharply. "What?" "If you leave. What if I came along?" She met his eyes. "I'm a decent assistant now. I know your methods, your supplies, and I don't have anything tying me here." "Lena, I'm serious. You said yourself that having help would make the work easier, and I—" She paused, trying to articulate something she barely understood. "I don't want to go back to being alone, to being the person I was before the mountain." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "You don't owe me that. You stayed for the hearing, gave testimony that probably destroyed any chance you had at a normal life in these territories. That's enough." "What if I don't want a normal life?" The words came out more intense than she intended. "What if I want this? The work, the mountain, helping people who have nowhere else to go?" "It's not romantic, Lena. It's hard and dangerous, and most of the time people don't even thank you for it." "I know. I've been living it for 3 months. She leaned forward. "I'm not some girl with fantasies about frontier medicine. I've seen the blood and the screaming and the times when nothing you do is enough, and I still want to be part of it." Elias studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "Why?" "Because it matters. Because you matter." She held his gaze. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that means more than making dresses for women who will throw me away the moment I'm inconvenient." Something shifted in his expression, the walls he kept so carefully maintained cracking just slightly. "If the board rules against me and I run, you'll be running too. Wanted for harboring a fugitive, aiding illegal practice. Your name will be ruined." "My name's already ruined in Ridgemont. Might as well make it count for something." Elias reached across the table and took her hand, not the clinical touch of a healer, but something more deliberate, more personal. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They sat like that for a while, hands joined across the rough table, neither speaking because words felt insufficient for what was happening between them. Somewhere in the past months, they'd stopped being simply healer and patient, had become something more complex, more necessary to each other. Finally, Elias released her hand and stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we find out if we're planning a future or an escape." But Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in her rented bed listening to the sounds of Cooperton at night, voices from the saloon, horses in the street, the distant whistle of a train. The civilized world felt alien now, too loud and crowded after months on the mountain. She thought about what she'd said to Elias, meant every word, but saying it had made something real that had been safely abstract before. If she stayed with him, whether on the mountain or on the run, she was choosing a life outside the normal boundaries. No marriage prospects, no social standing, no safety net if things went wrong. Just work and purpose and the strange partnership they'd built from desperation and trust. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, Lena felt calm. She'd already lost everything once. This time, she was choosing what to build in the rubble. The next morning dawned gray and cold. They assembled at the courthouse early, everyone too anxious to wait. The gallery filled quickly. Word had spread about the hearing, and half of Cooperton seemed to have shown up to see how it ended. Dr. Castellan entered precisely at 9, his fellow board members filing in behind him. Their expressions gave nothing away. "This board has deliberated extensively on the matter of Elias Varn," Dr. Castellan began, his voice formal and heavy. "We've reviewed the evidence, heard testimony from multiple witnesses, and considered the legal and medical implications of our decision." Lena felt Elias tense beside her. She reached under the table and gripped his hand. "The charges brought by Dr. Harrison are serious," Dr. Castellan continued. "Practicing medicine without proper licensing, using experimental treatments, maintaining inappropriate relationships with patients, these are not matters to be taken lightly." Harrison sat forward, barely concealing his satisfaction. "However, Doctor," Castellan said, and the word fell like a hammer, "this board has found significant discrepancies between Dr. Harrison's characterization of events and the testimony provided by Mr. Varn's patients." Harrison's smile faltered. "The witnesses presented today spoke to treatments that were, by all accounts, successful. Lives saved, conditions treated, outcomes that met or exceeded what traditional medicine could have provided." Dr. Castellan looked directly at Elias. "While your methods are unconventional, Mr. Varn, we cannot find evidence that they are unsafe or unethical." "This is outrageous," Harrison started. "Dr. Harrison, you will be silent." Dr. Castellan's voice cut like ice. "This board is also deeply troubled by your conduct. Miss Cross testified that you refused to examine her based on appearance, an accusation you did not adequately refute. That represents a failure of professional duty that reflects poorly on your practice." Harrison's face went white. "As for the charges of impropriety regarding Miss Cross's living arrangements, we find them speculative at best and malicious at worst. Miss Cross is an adult who made an informed decision to accept treatment and housing. Nothing in the testimony suggests coercion or manipulation." Dr. Castellan shuffled his papers. "Therefore, this board rules as follows. Mr. Varn is permitted to continue medical practice in the territories, conditional upon quarterly reviews to ensure patient safety and welfare. He will maintain detailed records of all treatments and make them available for inspection upon request." Lena felt the air rush out of her lungs. Beside her, Elias sat frozen, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Furthermore," Dr. Castellan continued, "Dr. Harrison is formally censured for his failure to provide care to Miss Cross and for bringing charges that appear motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate concern. This censure will be noted in his professional record." The courtroom erupted. Harrison shot to his feet, shouting about injustice and corruption, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. People were clapping, cheering, and Lena felt hands on her shoulders as Sarah and the others crowded around to celebrate. Through it all, Elias sat perfectly still, staring at the board as if waiting for them to take it back. Lena leaned close. "You won." "We won," he corrected quietly. Then, louder, with something like wonder, "We actually won." The crowd swept them outside where the celebration continued on the courthouse steps. Thomas produced a flask and passed it around. Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time. Even James Preston, normally reserved, was grinning like a fool. But Lena watched Elias, saw the way he stood slightly apart from the chaos, still processing what had happened. She made her way to his side. "You okay?" "I don't know." He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I expected to lose. Expected to be packing and running by nightfall. Instead, you get quarterly reviews and record keeping. Instead, I get to keep working." His voice cracked slightly. "I get to keep helping people." Lena understood. He'd built his whole life around the expectation of being alone, of fighting losing battles against systems designed to crush him. Winning felt foreign, almost dangerous. "You also get an assistant," she said, "if the offer's still open." Elias turned to her fully. "You're sure? This doesn't change the work, doesn't make it easier or safer." "I'm sure. The mountain's brutal in winter. We'll be snowed in for months with just each other for company." "Good. I'm tired of crowds." Something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth. You're stubborn, you know that? I learned from the best. This time he did smile, genuine and open in a way she'd never seen. All right then, partners. He offered his hand formally, and Lena shook it with equal gravity, sealing an agreement that felt more binding than any legal contract. The journey back to the mountain took 3 days, but it felt different now. Lighter, somehow, despite the knowledge of quarterly reviews and scrutiny ahead. They traveled with Thomas and his brother part of the way, Sarah and James another section, until finally it was just Elias and Lena riding through the familiar pine forest toward home. Home. When had she started thinking of the cabin that way? They arrived at dusk to find everything exactly as they'd left it. The cabin secure, the animals fed by a neighbor who'd agreed to check on them, the medical supplies organized and waiting. Lena dismounted and stood looking at it all with fresh eyes. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, leading the horses to the barn. "That this is real now, not temporary, not just until I heal. Real." Having second thoughts? No. She turned to face him, having first thoughts about what comes next. What came next was work. They fell back into the rhythm of the mountain, but with a new dynamic. Lena wasn't a patient anymore, wasn't just helping where she could. She was learning deliberately now, asking questions about treatments and techniques, studying Elias's methods with the intention of mastering them. He taught willingly, sharing knowledge he'd guarded alone for years, showed her how to mix salves, set bones, recognize infection before it turned deadly. Some of it made her queasy the first time she helped stitch a wound. She had to step outside and breathe deeply before continuing. But she pushed through, determined to be useful. Spring arrived slowly, the snow retreating up the mountain in reluctant stages. With warmer weather came more patients, people who'd heard about the hearing and wanted to see the healer who'd beaten the medical board. Elias treated them all with the same careful attention, but Lena noticed he was different now. Less isolated, more willing to explain his reasoning, to teach not just her, but the patients themselves. One evening in late April, they sat on the cabin steps watching the sun set over the valley. The air smelled of pine and new growth, and somewhere distant a night bird called. "You never asked," Elias said suddenly. "Asked what?" "Why I really left Boston. You heard the official version at the hearing, but that's not the whole story." Lena waited, sensing this was important. "There was a patient," Elias continued, staring at the horizon. "Young woman, maybe 20. She came to me with abdominal pain that 3 other doctors had dismissed as hysteria. I examined her properly and found a tumor, operable if we move fast." He paused, jaw working. "The medical board said it was too risky, said I should manage her pain and let nature take its course. I disagreed, operated anyway without their approval." "Did she survive?" "She's alive and healthy in Philadelphia, married with 2 children." His voice was flat. "And I was charged with malpractice for performing unauthorized surgery. They were going to strip my license, maybe worse, so I left before they could." Lena thought about that. The choice between following rules and saving a life, between professional standing and actual medicine. "You did the right thing." "According to who? The board would say I was reckless, that I put my judgment above established protocol." "The woman who's alive would probably disagree." Elias smiled faintly. "Yeah. She sent me a letter once, tracked me down somehow. Said she named her first daughter after me." He shook his head. "Elias is a terrible name for a girl." Lena laughed, surprised by the sudden image. "You kept the letter?" "Burned it. Couldn't risk someone using it to find me." He looked at her. "But I remember every word." They sat in silence as darkness gathered. Lena thought about the woman in Philadelphia, with her impossible name, about all the people Elias had saved at cost to himself, about the price of doing right in a world that valued rules over results. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For telling me. For trusting me with that." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, so soft she almost missed it. "You're easy to trust." The words settled warm in her chest. They weren't romantic or flowery, but coming from Elias, they meant more than any poetry. He didn't trust easily, didn't open up without reason. That he'd chosen to do both felt like a gift. As spring deepened into early summer, their partnership solidified into something efficient and intuitive. Lena could anticipate what Elias needed before he asked, could read his subtle cues about when to push and when to step back. They developed their own shorthand, their own rhythm, and slowly, carefully, something else grew between them. Nothing dramatic or sudden, just a gradual awareness that the space between them had become charged with possibility. The accidental brush of hands that lasted a moment too long. The way Elias watched her work with something beyond professional assessment. The nights when Lena found herself standing at her door, wanting to cross the cabin and not quite daring. They didn't speak of it. Both understood that what they'd built was too important to risk on something as uncertain as desire. But it was there, unacknowledged and patient, waiting for the right moment. That moment came in June during a difficult birth that went wrong. The woman's husband arrived at the cabin just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and his face gray with panic. Lena was feeding the chickens when she heard the hoofbeats and ran to get Elias. "It's my wife," the man gasped before they could even ask. "The baby's coming wrong. Midwife says she's never seen anything like it. Says we need real help or they'll both die." Elias was already grabbing his medical bag. "How long has she been laboring?" "Since yesterday afternoon. Please, you have to come now." They rode hard for 40 minutes to a homestead tucked into a valley Lena had never seen. The cabin was larger than most, well built, but the sounds coming from inside made her stomach clench. A woman's screams, raw and desperate, punctuated by stretches of terrible silence. Inside, they found chaos. The midwife, an older woman with capable hands and terrified eyes, was trying to manage bleeding while the laboring woman thrashed on a bed soaked red. 2 other women hovered uselessly, and the husband pushed past them all to reach his wife. "Emma, I brought help. The healer's here." Elias moved to the bedside with Lena right behind him. One look at the woman and Lena felt her training kick in, pushing aside fear. Emma was maybe 19, pale as death, her eyes rolling back with pain. "How long since the waters broke?" Elias asked, already examining. 6 hours, the midwife said. "Baby's stuck sideways. I've tried to turn it but can't get purchase, and she's bleeding too much." Elias's hands moved over Emma's swollen belly, probing carefully. His face went grim. "The baby's transverse and the placenta's torn. We need to operate or we lose them both." "Operate?" The husband's voice cracked. "You mean cut her open? It's the only way to get the baby out safely. She'll die. She'll die if I don't." Elias turned to Lena. "Clear the table. We need a clean surface and more light." "Midwife, get me every clean cloth in this house and boiling water. You two," he gestured to the other women, "hold her steady." The next 30 minutes were controlled chaos as they transformed the cabin's main room into an operating theater. Lena moved on instinct, arranging instruments, preparing the chloroform Elias kept for emergencies, doing everything she'd watched him do a dozen times, but never under stakes this high. Emma was transferred to the table, still conscious and screaming. Elias administered the chloroform carefully, just enough to dull the worst pain without endangering the baby. Then he looked at Lena. "You ready?" She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The incision was precise and terrifying. Elias worked fast, his hands steady despite the blood, talking Lena through every step. She handed him instruments, sponged blood, held tissue back so he could see. The husband had to leave, couldn't watch, but the midwife stayed and proved her worth by anticipating what they needed. "There," Elias said finally, his hands moving inside the incision. "I've got the baby. Lena, be ready." He lifted out a tiny blue-tinged infant that wasn't breathing, handed it to the midwife while he focused on stopping Emma's bleeding. The room held its breath as the midwife cleared the baby's mouth, rubbed its chest, willed it to live. Nothing. Lena's heart sank. They'd been too late. The baby had been without air too long. Then a cough, a cry. Thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. The baby pinked up, its cries growing stronger, and the midwife burst into tears. Lena felt her own eyes burning, but didn't let herself stop. Elias was still working, stitching layers of tissue with painstaking care, and Emma's pulse was thready. "She's lost too much blood," Elias said quietly. "Even if the surgery's successful, infection could still take her." "What do we do?" Everything we can. Then we wait. They worked for another hour, finishing the closure and cleaning the wound. By the time they were done, both of them were covered in blood and shaking with exhaustion. Emma lay unconscious but breathing on the table, her baby, a girl, sleeping in the midwife's arms. The husband came back in, saw his wife and daughter both alive, and collapsed to his knees. "Thank you. Thank you." Elias stripped off his bloodied shirt, his face drawn. "She's not safe yet. The next 48 hours will tell us if she survives. Someone needs to watch her constantly, change the dressings, make sure fever doesn't set in." "I'll stay," Lena said immediately. Elias looked at her. "You've been up all night. So have you, and you need to get back to the mountain in case other patients come." She met his eyes. "I can do this. You taught me how." For a moment she thought he'd argue, then he nodded. "Change the dressing every 4 hours. If she develops fever or the wound shows signs of infection, send someone for me immediately. Don't wait." "I won't." He gathered his instruments with mechanical efficiency, gave the husband instructions about Emma's care, and prepared to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Lena. "You did good work today." The words were simple, but the weight behind them made her chest tight. "So did you." After he left, Lena settled into the vigil. The Homestead family gave her a chair beside Emma's bed and kept her supplied with coffee and food she barely touched. Every 4 hours, she changed the dressing, relieved each time to find the wound clean, no signs of rot. Emma remained unconscious but stable, her breathing even. The baby, they'd named her Grace, nursed from the midwife who'd recently weaned her own child and still had milk. Lena held her once, marveling at the tiny fingers and the absolute trust in her sleeping face. This fragile thing had been dying less than a day ago. Now she lived because Elias had been willing to try something most doctors would consider too dangerous. On the second night, Emma woke. Her eyes opened slowly, confused and glassy with pain. "My baby." "She's fine," Lena said quickly, bringing Grace over. "Healthy and beautiful. You both made it." Emma took her daughter with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were dying. I felt myself going and couldn't stop it. Elias Varn stopped it." "Where is he?" "Back on the mountain. But I'm here. I'll make sure you heal properly." Emma looked at Lena with dawning recognition. "You're the one from the hearing, the woman Dr. Harrison said was manipulated." Lena smiled faintly. "That's me. You don't look manipulated." "I'm not. I'm exactly where I want to be." Over the next week, Emma's recovery progressed steadily. No fever developed, the wound healed clean, and her strength returned day by day. Lena stayed through it all, teaching Emma and her husband how to care for the incision, what signs to watch for, when to worry, and when to relax. On the 8th day, Elias returned to check on his patient. He examined Emma with his usual thoroughness, nodded with satisfaction at the healing, and declared her out of danger. "You did this," he told Lena as they prepared to leave. "I performed the surgery, but you managed the recovery. That's harder in some ways, requires more patience." "I learned from someone patient," Lena said. The ride back to the mountain was quiet, both of them processing what they'd accomplished. When they finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting in brilliant oranges and reds across the valley. Elias dismounted and stood looking at the view like he was seeing it for the first time. "We saved 2 lives." "We did. A year ago, I would have done that surgery alone, managed everything myself because there was no one to help." He turned to face her. "Having you there made it possible to do more, to do better." Lena felt something shift in the air between them, the charged possibility they'd been ignoring for months suddenly present and unavoidable. "Elias, I'm not good at this," he interrupted, "at saying what I mean when it's not about medicine, but you should know that you've become essential to me, not just as an assistant, but as—" He stopped, struggling. "As someone I don't want to do this without." Her heart was hammering. "I feel the same way. I don't have much to offer. This cabin, this work, this life. It's all I've got. It's not comfortable or safe or respectable." "I don't want comfortable or safe or respectable." She moved closer. "I want this. I want you." The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like something that had been building since the moment she'd climbed into his cabin, half frozen and desperate. His hands were gentle on her face, her waist, and she realized this was the first time he'd touched her without clinical purpose. The first time it was just them, just this. When they finally pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. This changes things. Good. Things needed changing. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the fading light. Then Lena pulled back enough to see his face. "We should go inside. We have work to do." He laughed, surprised and genuine. Always practical. Someone has to be. Inside the cabin, they fell into their evening routine with a new awareness humming beneath the familiar motions. Lena started dinner while Elias checked his supplies and made notes about Emma's case. But now there were small touches, his hand on her shoulder as he passed, her fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee. Little acknowledgments of the shift between them. Later, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Elias said, "The quarterly review is next week." "I know. They'll ask questions about the surgery, about our living situation, about everything." "Let them ask." Lena met his eyes. "We have nothing to hide. They'll make assumptions. About us, about what this is. Then we'll tell them the truth, that we're partners in every way that matters." Elias studied her for a long moment. "You mean that? I've never meant anything more." The review came on a blazing hot day in late June. 2 board representatives made the journey to the mountain, both looking uncomfortable and out of place in the wilderness. They examined Elias's records, questioned his methods, and interviewed Lena extensively about her role in the practice. "Miss Cross," the senior representative said carefully, "we understand you've taken on significant medical responsibilities. You're aware that practicing medicine without proper credentials is illegal?" "I'm aware," Lena said calmly. "I don't practice medicine. I assist a licensed practitioner under his direct supervision." The distinction seems thin. It's the same distinction that exists in every doctor's office that employs nurses or assistants. I change dressings, prepare instruments, and help manage patient care under Elias Varn's guidance. If that's illegal, then half the medical practices in the territory are breaking the law. The representative frowned but moved on. They reviewed the records of Emma's surgery with particular scrutiny, questioning whether such a dangerous procedure should have been attempted in a remote cabin. "The alternative was to let them die," Elias said flatly. "The nearest hospital is 4 days away. They didn't have 4 days. Still, the risk was calculated and necessary. Both patients survived. Both are healthy. That's the outcome that matters." In the end, the representatives found nothing to justify shutting down the practice. They left with warnings about maintaining proper documentation and staying within established guidelines, but the underlying message was clear. Elias had won the right to keep working. After they'd gone, Lena and Elias stood on the cabin steps watching them disappear down the trail. "They'll keep looking for reasons to stop you," Lena said. "I know. We'll keep giving them reasons not to." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Yeah, we will." Summer deepened into fall, bringing a steady stream of patients and the satisfaction of work well done. Word had spread about the surgery, and more people sought them out. Some traveled for days to reach the mountain, desperate for help they couldn't get elsewhere. Lena's skills grew with each case. She learned to stitch wounds cleanly, to recognize different types of infections, to assist in increasingly complex procedures. Elias taught her everything he knew, holding nothing back, and she absorbed it with the fierce determination that had carried her up the mountain in the first place. They fell into a rhythm that was part professional partnership, part something deeper. Nights found them working late over medical texts, discussing cases and techniques. Mornings began with coffee shared in comfortable silence before the day's work started. And in the spaces between, they built something that had no formal name but felt more solid than any legal contract. In October, a letter arrived from Cooperton. Lena opened it to find official-looking documents and a brief note from Dr. Castellan. "What is it?" Elias asked, seeing her expression. "They're offering me certification as a medical assistant." She read the letter again, hardly believing it. "If I pass an examination and complete a formal apprenticeship, which they're willing to credit based on my work here, I can be legally recognized. Elias took the letter, reading it carefully. This is Harrison's doing. What? He's gone. Resigned from his practice in Ridgemont and moved back east. Elias's mouth quirked. Apparently the censure damaged his reputation too much to recover from. Dr. Castellan is cleaning house, pushing for more assistant training programs to fill the gap. Lena stared at the documents. Legal recognition. The ability to work openly without fear of prosecution. It felt surreal. Are you going to do it? Elias asked. Do you want me to? What I want is for you to choose what's best for you. Not for me. Not for the practice. For you. Lena thought about that. About the woman she'd been when she first climbed this mountain. Desperate, broken, convinced she was worthless. About who she'd become. Skilled, confident, essential to work that mattered. I'll do it, she said. Not because I need the certification to know I'm good at this, but because it'll make the work easier, give us more legitimacy when the board comes sniffing around. Practical to the end, Elias said, but he was smiling. The examination took place in November, back in Cooperton. Lena demonstrated her skills before a panel of doctors who watched with expressions ranging from skeptical to impressed. She answered questions about anatomy, treatment protocols, emergency procedures. Showed them the notebooks where she'd documented every case she'd worked, every technique she'd learned. When it was over, Dr. Castellan shook her hand. You've done remarkable work, Miss Cross. Most formally trained assistants don't have half your practical experience. I had a good teacher. Indeed. Mr. Varn's methods may be unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. He handed her the certificate, official and binding. Welcome to the profession. Lena rode back to the mountain with the certificate carefully wrapped in oilcloth, her mind spinning with what it meant. She was legitimate now, recognized by the same system that had tried to shut her out. It felt like victory and vindication all at once. Elias met her at the cabin door, his eyes searching her face. Well? She held up the certificate. Official medical assistant, legally certified to practice under a licensed physician. He pulled her into a kiss that started celebratory and deepened into something more intense. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias said, I'm proud of you. We did this together. No, you did this. I just gave you the tools. His hands framed her face. You turned yourself into something the board couldn't ignore. That's all you, Lena. The words settled warm in her chest, filling spaces that had been empty for so long. She'd spent years thinking her worth was measured by her seamstress skills, by whether people wanted her services. Had let a skin condition destroy that identity completely. But here, on this mountain, she'd built something new, something that couldn't be taken away by illness or judgment or fear. She was a healer now, recognized and necessary, and good at what she did. Winter came hard that year, snow piling deep and isolating them for weeks at a time. But the cabin was well stocked and warm, and they had each other. Long nights found them reading medical journals by lamplight, arguing about techniques and debating treatments. Days were spent maintaining supplies and caring for the few patients brave enough to make the winter journey. One evening in January, almost exactly a year after Lena had first climbed the mountain, they sat by the fire watching snow fall outside the window. I've been thinking, Elias said. Dangerous habit. He smiled. About expanding. We could build a second cabin, set up a proper recovery space for patients who need extended care, maybe even recruit another assistant to help with the workload. Lena looked at him with surprise. That's ambitious. You've always been so careful about staying small, staying off the board's radar. That was before. He took her hand. Before I had a partner who could help me manage something bigger. Before I had proof that doing this right means doing it openly. The board will watch us even more closely. Let them watch. They'll see skilled treatment and good outcomes. That's all we need to show them. Lena thought about the vision he was describing, a real medical practice on the mountain, serving people who had nowhere else to turn. It was everything they'd fought for, made permanent and official. When do we start building? She asked. The smile he gave her was worth every hard moment that had brought them here. Spring, when the ground thaws and we can get supplies up the mountain. They spent the rest of winter planning, drew up designs for the expansion, made lists of equipment they'd need, discussed how to manage multiple patients. It felt like building a future, something solid and lasting. In March, as snow began to melt and the first patients of spring arrived, Lena stood outside the cabin looking at the clearing where they'd build. She could see it already, the new structure, patients recovering in clean rooms, the practice growing into something that could help even more people. "You're smiling," Elias said, coming to stand beside her. "I'm happy." "Yeah?" He wrapped an arm around her waist. "Even though you're stuck on a mountain with a stubborn healer and more work than any sane person would accept?" "Especially because of that." Lena leaned into him. "I came up here to survive, found a reason to live instead." Feelings mutual. They stood together watching the valley green up with spring, both aware of how far they'd come. Lena thought about the woman who'd climbed this mountain in desperation, broken and alone and terrified. That woman was gone, transformed by pain and purpose into someone stronger. She wasn't the same person who'd stood in Dr. Harrison's office begging for help. Wasn't even the same person who'd testified at the hearing. She'd been remade, piece by piece, into someone who didn't need anyone's permission to be valuable. In late April, Thomas and James Preston arrived with lumber and supplies. They spent 3 weeks building the expansion, working from dawn to dusk. Other families came to help, bringing food and tools and labor. The mountain community that had rallied to defend Elias at the hearing now gathered to build something permanent. On the last day of construction, as they stood back admiring the new building, Sarah Preston approached Lena. "This is going to change things," Sarah said, "having a real medical facility up here. People won't have to choose between dying at home and dying on the road to Cooperton." "That's the idea." "It's more than that, though." Sarah shifted her daughter to her other hip. "You're proving something, that there's another way to do this. Medicine that serves everyone, not just people who can pay well and fit the right profile." Lena looked at the new building, solid and real against the mountain backdrop. "Elias proved that. I'm just helping. You proved it too. By refusing to go back when Harrison tried to drag you, by standing up and telling your truth, even when it was dangerous." Sarah met her eyes. "Girls are going to hear your story and know they can fight for themselves. That matters." The words hit harder than Lena expected. She'd been so focused on the immediate work, healing, building, surviving, that she hadn't thought about the larger impact. But Sarah was right. Every woman who'd been told she was too damaged, too difficult, too unconventional, would see what Lena had done and know it was possible to rewrite the rules. That evening, after everyone had left and the new building stood empty and waiting, Elias found Lena sitting on its front steps. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we built something important here. Not just the building. Everything." He sat beside her. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. You were already doing it before I arrived." "I was surviving. That's different from building." He took her hand. "You made me believe this could be more than just one man fighting alone. Made me imagine a future bigger than just getting through each day." Lena squeezed his fingers. "You gave me a future when I thought I had none. Seems like a fair trade." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clean mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The night smelled of pine and possibility. "I want to marry you," Elias said suddenly. Lena turned to look at him, surprised. "What?" "I know it's not practical, won't change anything legally, won't make the work easier, but I want to." His voice was steady, but his eyes were vulnerable. "Want everyone to know you're my partner in every way. Want to make this official." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. Not the sad tears she'd shed in Ridgemont watching her life fall apart, but something different. Something fierce and joyful. "Yes," she said simply. They married in June, on the mountain with the whole community gathered. No fancy dresses or elaborate ceremonies, just honest vows spoken under open sky, witnessed by people who understood what they'd built together. Sarah stood up with Lena, and Thomas with Elias, and afterwards everyone ate and celebrated long into the night. Lena wore a simple dress she'd made herself, her scarred hand steady as she joined them with Elias's. Those scars had once been marks of shame, evidence of her unworthiness. Now they were proof of survival, of healing, of the journey that had brought her here. As summer settled over the mountain, the expanded practice thrived. They took on a second assistant, a young man named Peter whose family farmed in the valley and who showed real aptitude for medicine. Between the three of them, they could manage more patients, more complex cases, more of the work that needed doing. The quarterly reviews continued, but they'd become almost routine. The board representatives arrived, examined records, found everything in order, and left. Elias's methods were still unconventional, but the outcomes couldn't be argued with. And Lena's certification gave them additional legitimacy that made it harder for critics to complain. In September, news reached the mountain that Dr. Harrison had died back east. Heart failure, the letter said. Elias read it without expression, then folded it carefully and put it away. "How do you feel?" Lena asked. "I don't know. Satisfied? Angry that he never understood what he did wrong?" He shook his head. "Mostly just tired of carrying that grudge. It's been weighing on me longer than I realized." "You can let it go now." "Yeah, I can." He pulled her close. "I'd rather focus on what we're building than what we're fighting against." That became their guiding principle. Not fighting against the establishment, but building something better alongside it. Proving through steady work and good outcomes that medicine could be different, more accessible, more humane, more focused on actual healing than professional protocols. By the time winter came again, they'd treated hundreds of patients. Some came from as far as 4 territories away, traveling for weeks to reach the mountain healer who'd stood up to the medical board and won. Each one carried their story back home, spreading word of what was possible when medicine served people instead of pride. Lena stood at the window one December evening, watching snow fall over the valley, and marveled at how much had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been dying in a boarding house, abandoned by everyone who should have helped. Now she was essential to a thriving practice, married to a man she respected and loved, building a legacy that would outlast them both. "Come to bed," Elias called from the loft. "Early surgery tomorrow." "Coming." But Lena stayed a moment longer, her hand pressed against the cold glass. She thought about that desperate climb in the dark, about choosing to fight when surrender would have been easier, about trusting a stranger with her life and discovering she could trust herself even more, about learning that worth wasn't something given by others. It was something you built with your own scarred hands, one choice at a time. The mountain had broken her down to nothing, then helped her rebuild stronger. The frontier had tried to crush her, and she'd reshaped it instead. Not perfectly, not easily, but truly. She'd stopped being the woman society threw away and become the woman people needed. And that transformation, that hard-won victory, was worth every painful step of the journey. Lena turned from the window and climbed the stairs to where Elias waited. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, new chances to prove that compassion and skill mattered more than convention. But tonight, she had everything she needed. A home built from desperation and determination, work that gave her purpose, a partner who saw her worth even when she couldn't. She'd climbed a mountain to survive, found a life worth living instead. And that, Lena thought as she settled beside Elias in the warmth, was the best kind of healing.